What do you get if you cross one of the most influential, notorious and greatest horror films ever made with one of the most influential horror video games ever made? You get Evil Dead Hail to the King on the Sega Dreamcast. Released in 2000 in North America and 2001 in Europe by THQ, Hail to the King was developed by Heavy Iron Studios, who would later go on to develop numerous SpongeBob, Disney and Scooby-Doo games, as well as UFC Personal Trainer, Family Guy Back to the Multiverse, and Harley Pasternak's Hollywood Workout. Their most recent game has been Pac-Man Mega Tunnel Battle for Stadia. Evil Dead Hail to the King acts as a direct sequel to the 1992 film Army of Darkness, which saw our hero Ash transported back to 1300 AD and fight an army of Deadites to retrieve the Necronomicon to try and get home. Hail to the King is the second Evil Dead video game, the previous one being the film tie-in to the original film that was released in 1984 by Palace Software for the Commodore 64, BBC Micro and ZX Spectrum. Hail to the King takes place 8 years after the events of Army of Darkness. Our hero, Ash Williams, has returned to his old life working at the S-Mart and is dating his colleague Jenny, but he begins to suffer from nightmares about the events that happened in the cabin. So Jenny convinces Ash to return to the infamous cabin to face his demons. Yeah, great idea. While there, the evil is awoken once again, courtesy of Ash's dismembered possessed hand and the old tape player. The evil bursts in and kidnaps Jenny. Ash is knocked unconscious by Bad Ash, wakes up, rebuilds his chainsaw hand and with his trademark groovy sets out to retrieve the pages of the Necronomicon and save Jenny. Hail to the King is a survival horror game which borrows heavily from the Resident Evil style of graphics and gameplay, in which you basically have to find this to activate that to access there. The game is set across various locations, including the infamous cabin, the tool shed, the surrounding forest, the Hellbillies house. Yes, that's Hellbillies, not Hillbillies. This is Evil Dead after all. A hedge maze, a Wolverine scout camp, an abandoned mine, and later you get transported to ancient Damascus. You have a map which can be used to navigate your way around the various areas, although it is completely useless when you're in the hedge maze, which is hands down the most frustrating area you will explore, as you have no way of knowing where you're going and it's very much a case of trial and error with different routes, which is made all the more annoying when you're being constantly attacked by respawning enemies. Your main enemies are Deadites, parasitic demons that possess mortals and look to feed on their souls. There are various types of Deadites that you must dispatch, including Ghost Deadites, Deadites that were once human, Skullbats, a family of Hellbilly Deadites, prancing and pirouetting skeletons, and a possessed Wolverine scout troop, including their scout leader. Later on, you'll face armoured skeleton Deadites, hooded guild members, and weird dog-rooster hybrid Deadites called Familiars, all of which are waiting to be introduced to the business end of your boomstick. When Ash is confronted by Deadites, which randomly appear out of the ground or thin air, he can dispatch them with either his trusty axe, a pistol, his famous boomstick, or a rifle. Also in his arsenal is his always reliable chainsaw hand. You can hack away or shoot at enemies to kill them, or you can weaken them and finish them off with your chainsaw in a spectacular, and in the case of when you finish off a Deadite Eagle Scout, spinny fashion. Dispatch Deadites will drop random items like ammo or health packs, of which, contrary to the Resident Evil style of limited ammo and health, here you have an abundance of ammo and health. If, however, the Deadites get too much for you and you end up running out of life, you die, and it's back to the title screen to load up your save game and try again. Unfortunately, load times aren't all that long.
Let's go.
As you explore, you'll find various items which you can store in your inventory. Always present is your chainsaw, which you have to keep topped up with fuel, of which you can either find cans of scattered around or create with red mushrooms. Your inventory also houses your axe and various guns you collect along the way. Also a staple of your inventory is the converter, which allows you to use locally growing mushrooms or jars of moonshine to synthesize either fuel for your chainsaw or health packs. Think of mushrooms as the Evil Dead version of Resident Evil herbs. Red mushrooms are converted into fuel, and white mushrooms are converted into health packs. As you explore and inspect areas, similar to Resident Evil, you will get a description of what you have found or what you're looking at. Now, I've always liked this mechanic, as I feel it helps create an atmosphere as you're seeing things from the character's perspective. Although with Hail to the King, you have to make sure that you are absolutely precisely at the right spot and are completely stationary before you can search. Otherwise, it won't register and you could potentially miss an item or important information if you're still moving when you press search. Saving your progress comes in the form of save tapes, not that dissimilar from Resident Evil's ink ribbons, which you randomly come across on your travels or that magically appear just after you defeat a boss. Now, when you start the game, you're in the cabin beside Professor Nobi's tape recorder, so you would automatically assume, applying the Resident Evil logic of game saving, that just as you would use the ink ribbon with the typewriter to save your progress there, you would use a save tape with the tape recorder here, right? Wrong. You save the game via the Resident Evil style item chest that are dotted all over the game with the save tapes, which I'm sorry makes no sense. Surely having tape recorders alongside the chest would have made more sense, especially seeing as you need a save tape to save your game. The first time I played Hail to the King, I had no idea how to save my game until I read the manual, which instructs you that to save your progress with a save tape, you need to be at the inventory chest.
Oh, you bastards! Why are you torturing me like this? Why?
Controls are taken straight from the Resident Evil How to Survive Survival Horror Handbook, in that they use the old industry standard tank controls, where pressing up on the D-pad moves Ash forward, down moves or hops backwards, and left and right rotate him accordingly. Now, tank controls are very Marmite, in that you either love them or you hate them. Now, personally, having been raised on the original Resident Evil back in the day which used tank controls, I'm more than happy to use them. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say I prefer them, as it's what I've been raised on and they just personally, they feel right to me. My preference of tank controls even extends to me using them on the modern Resident Evil games. I'm so used to using them. But I guess I'm just showing my age now. Control wise, pressing the A button makes Ash swing his chainsaw hand. B is the action or search button. X is use your second weapon, which is either one of your 3 guns or your trusty axe. Y makes Ash give a trademark witty one-liner.
Yo, come to it, Papa. Come get some. Let's go. You're going down. Follow this. Groovy.
The left trigger revs up and starts your chainsaw, which, while held and pressing A, does a powerful chainsaw attack. The right trigger is run, and start accesses your inventory. Unfortunately, overall, the controls can be frustratingly choppy, as Ash moves rather clumsily. This can lead to you veering off in a direction you don't want to head in, or you can end up getting stuck on the background or scenery. Now, while this has never been game breaking, and that it's never led to me having to restart the game, it can make it difficult when you're trying to make a quick getaway from a horde of deadites. Fighting against the deadites is also rather awkward and frustrating. The main reason being that there's no auto aim or lock on targeting of which enemy you want to attack. Fighting deadites basically consists of facing Ash roughly in the direction of said deadite, pressing attack, be it chainsaw or your axe or gun, and hoping for the best. Now, the first Resident Evil didn't have auto aim, but the tighter and more responsive controls made up for this and allowed you to move more effectively to be able to evade any attacks and make a quick getaway if needed. This unfortunately is not the case with Hail to the King. You basically stand in front of the enemy and keep hacking or shooting frantically until they die. Also, the hit detection is not all that effective and you have to be at the precise position to be able to land a hit. However, it is quite forgiving in places which does make up for it. Another frustrating aspect of the controls is when you enter a room through a door or exit your inventory, Ash is frozen for a few seconds and won't move, which can result in you getting attacked and taking damage. This also happens when you get hit, which can make getting a quick getaway or getting some needed space between you and deadites a real chore. As you progress through the game, rather than discovering new items which you've searched for, you'll simply just acquire or find them. This can even include key items. For example, When you enter the Hellbilly house, you simply get some on-screen text informing you that you have found your trusty old boomstick, which seems rather anticlimactic. As any Evil Dead fan will tell you, Ash's boomstick, his sawn-off double-barrel shotgun, is iconic to the series.
All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up. See this? This is my boomstick!
So to have him simply find it is rather underwhelming and seems like a missed opportunity. We could have had Ash searching for and finding his boomstick, spinning it on his finger, firing out a witty one-liner in only the way that Bruce Campbell can, slinging the boomstick over his shoulder into its holster and marching on.
Groovy.
But no, we get, you have found your trusty old boomstick. You also just acquire items like the herbicide when you defeat the Hellbilly Granny Spider Boss, which again is rather underwhelming. You don't even find it in the room once you've defeated her like you would in Resident Evil, it just magically appears in your inventory. Speaking of boss battles, these are frequent occurrences as you make your way through the game. Bosses include said bedbound Hellbilly Granny, who turns into a huge spider granny and tries to kill you after having you traipse around trying to find a mystical amulet for her.
Whoa.
A possessed Wolverine scout leader who you have to defeat by hitting the supporting beams in the cave, which causes rocks to come tumbling down and land on him, or you if you time it wrong. This particular boss I found very frustrating, as you have to time your attack perfectly or the rocks end up falling on you. All this while constantly having to keep running from the spiritually demonic scout leader, as he can catch up to you really easily, and when he does, it's almost impossible to get away from him, so it's important to keep hitting those beams and keep those rocks falling. There's a demonic tree monster who Ash refers to as
Yo, tree bitch. Let's go.
which is a nice nod to the film series, and this boss is very easy to defeat. All you need to do is get up close to it, rev up your chainsaw and start hacking away. There's an evil skeleton version of Ash, complete with Chainsaw Hand, who you fight in a church. Deadeye Annie from Evil Dead 2, complete with Kandarian dagger still lodged in her back.
What the... Annie?
Someone's in my fruit cellar. Someone with a fresh soul.
A purple-gowned evil high priest. Skeleton Deadeye in the pump room. An armoured skeleton Deadeye captain. A large armoured demon who easily goes down after dousing him with cold water and then molten metal. A large hulking mud golem. And finally, Bad Ash, who, once you defeat him, turns into a full-blown Kandarian demon, who you then have to defeat. Each boss, apart from the Deadite Scout Leader, huge armoured boss and the final Kandarian demon, can all easily be defeated with some frantic swinging of your axe and chainsaw, or rounds from your gun. The gameplay on the Scout Leader, armoured boss and Kandarian demon is a bit more varied, as you have to use the environment to defeat them, which mixes things up a bit and adds a bit of variety to the gameplay. More of this in the game would have been nice. As opposed to Resident Evil, where once you have killed the zombies or enemy, they stay dead, in Hail to the King, Deadites randomly and repeatedly respawn, which can be really annoying as it stops the flow of the game and your ability to search for items, as you're constantly bombarded by wave after wave of Deadites. And because of the controls and so-so hit detection making dispatching enemies a bit of a chore, this can get very frustrating very quickly, especially as taking on Deadites will cost you health every time. After a while, you'll just opt to run away from them rather than take them on, as it's a lot less hassle. Later on, when you're transported to Damascus, you're given the ability to upgrade your guns, use different ammo, and then eventually upgrade your chainsaw to a Damascus blade, which you get from the big armoured boss, which you then use to face Bad Ash in the final showdown. But again, the Damascus blade is just given to you when you defeat the boss. Surely a better narrative approach to this would be to have you search for pieces of the blade, for it then to be forged into the Damascus blade. But having you simply acquire it from a defeated boss is just a bit narratively easy and lazy. Overall, the gameplay does improve when you reach Damascus, in that the relentless respawning of enemies that run you down are nowhere near as frequent. This I found made the game more enjoyable. Graphically, Hail to the King follows the Resident Evil standard, using pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed cameras. Now it's clear that Heavy Iron had done their homework, as both the cabin and the immediate surroundings have been lovingly and accurately recreated. Details like the mounted deer head over the fireplace, the rocking chair, the cellar, to the swinging seat outside the cabin, and Linda's burial site complete with makeshift crucifix. All these small details show that the developers were making a game for fans of Evil Dead, and they wanted to do good by them. Personally, I'm a big fan of pre-rendered backgrounds, and Hail to the King showcases some fantastically detailed backgrounds, although some can be slightly muddy and pixelated in places. Particular highlights are the interior of the cabin, with the warm glow of the fire and the silhouetted trees and curtains that are gently blowing in the wind. These are a noticeable improvement over the PS1 version, but you'd expect that with the added power of the Dreamcast. Other pre-rendered highlights I particularly liked included the Hellbilly's cabin, which stands imposing as you approach it, with its windows glowing eerily in the darkness. I also like the way the light seeps through the door of the pig pen that leads into the Hellbilly's cabin. And when you reach Damascus, the glow of the light at the market where your Delta lies in a crumpled heap creates a feeling of eerie calm. However, the pre-rendered highlight for me when you reach Damascus is the view as you cross the bridge over to access the prison cell. As you make your way over, you're treated to an amazing shot of the castle which dominates the skyline and is very cinematic and effective. The use of fixed cameras is particularly effective at creating a feeling of being watched. Like the evil that's all around you is constantly observing your every move. It knows you're here and is just waiting to strike. One great example of this is when you cross the bridge in the caves to fight the Wolverine scout leader. It looks like you're being watched from under the bridge. The colour palette of Hail to the King is overall a dark and drab one, but this is in keeping with the tone of the game, with lots of dark tones of blues, browns and greens. The colour palette only really brightens up briefly when you land in ancient Damascus and changes to a harsh, sun-bleached tone. The game, I would argue, is on a reasonably large scale, incorporating large, wide open areas, huge, towering, imposing buildings, but also using tight, claustrophobic environments to balance things out. However, the game is far from being a graphical showcase of both Evil Dead and the Dreamcast, and while the pre-rendered backgrounds may be impressive, the character models sadly aren't. Take our protagonist, our hero, Ash Williams. It's like the character design and look was based on somebody describing Bruce Campbell down the phone to somebody in the art department, somebody who had clearly never heard of or seen Bruce before. As a result, Bruce's chiselled, handsome, heroic looks are lost and replaced with what looks like a cheap knockoff. On the positive side, the actual character model of Ash, minus his head of course, is fairly detailed. However, other characters were not as fortunate. One example being Granny Hillbilly. Even in the cutscene, which looks like it was lifted straight from the PS1 version, shows the very limited detail in her character design. Her face has zero detail in it and is a mess of sharp edges, harsh shapes, and this is the cutscene. The Deadites you fight are also sadly not all that impressive and clearly not the grotesque Deadites fans of the series are used to. The Ghost Deadites just look very flat and lack detail. The fleshy ones do look a bit better with their rotting flesh being very apparent. However, the skeletons look very generic and very blocky. They look like they're made of Lego and they all look the same. There's no variation. It's very much a bit of a cut and paste job. You do get a bit of skeletal variation in ancient Damascus as you get armoured skeletons, but that's about as far as it goes. The Skullbats, Familiars and Guild Deadites are again all cut and paste and just lack variety. The game is also not very gory, which is unfortunate as it's an Evil Dead game. I love the moment in the cellar with the projector and the leaking pipe which gushes out blood into Ash's face when you try and tighten it up with the wrench. But apart from that, aside from some bits of blood from enemies when you kill them, and blood which seems to constantly be dripping from Ash's chainsaw, the game is quite light on the gore front and isn't really a testament to its gory franchise. The sound design is one of Hail to the King's strong points and is brilliantly used to create atmosphere and tension. Things like the sound of the crackling fireplace and Ash's footsteps on the hollow wooden floors in the cabin, coupled with the sound of the wind and rustling trees outside, creates a really tense and uneasy feeling. It's like you're just waiting for something to burst out and attack you, which it does. Outside, the sound of the howling wind and rustling trees, along with the sound of Ash's footsteps on the gravelly ground, create a really creepy atmosphere of vulnerability and make you feel really exposed. It's like the forest and the environment is alive and it's watching you. In the cellar, the sound of the projector constantly ticking over and the slightly unnerving music that's stuck on a constant loop, it really creates a sense of unease and tension, and I found this a really effective use of sound. Deadites burst out of the ground with a shriek that at first takes you by surprise, as it's very much in keeping with the Deadite sound from the film. It's obvious that the intention of this was to create tension, as you have no idea when or if the Deadite will burst out of the ground. But after a while, it just becomes rather predictable and grows tiresome really quickly. There's also times where the sound will just glitch out and you're left dispatching Deadites with an awkward silence. Another use of sound straight from the film is the sound of a disembodied Deadite taunting Ash by repeatedly saying,
I'll swallow your soul!
which you will hear repeated as you make your way through the forest and the hedge maze. Now I'm assuming that this was intended to create a tense, creepy and suspenseful atmosphere, as the forces of evil try and break Ash's spirit and convince him that his actions are futile as he can never defeat the Necronomicon and the forces of evil. But after hearing it for the 30th time, like a broken record, it just comes across as goofy and quite frankly annoying, and ends up having the opposite effect of what it's trying to achieve. This is a prime example of when less could have been more. Using the sound effect less often, and even including different ones from the film, would have created more of a tense atmosphere. The PS1 version also includes, as well as,
I'll swallow your soul!
for some variation, which didn't appear to be in the Dreamcast version. So using this, and possibly other sound bites from the film, like Linda singing the creepy nursery rhyme, or Cheryl telling Ash that she's feeling better now when she's locked in the cellar. Using these would have been much more effective and would have created a much more tense and creepy atmosphere.
We're gonna get you, not another peep. Time to go to sleep.
Ashley, help me. Let me out of here. Ashley? Ash, help me. Let me out of here. I'm all right now. I'm all right now, Ashley. I'm all right. Unlock this chain and let me out.
I don't want to die. You're not gonna leave me here, are you? Are you, Ash?
Personally, I would have also liked to have found more text journals or audio recordings from Professor Nobi, outlining his time in the cabin and his research into the Necronomicon, as I feel this would have added some atmosphere and tension to the game and would have been really in keeping with the film.
I have seen the dark shadows moving in the woods, and I have no doubt that whatever I have resurrected through this book is sure to come calling for me.
When you reach Damascus, the sound of the howling wind and faint moans, like in the forest, create a feeling of tension and isolation, which I think is really effective.
You're going down.
There isn't much music in Hail to the King. You only really get music when you're facing a boss battle. Then you're treated to some really epic and grand orchestral scores, complete with a grand choir who sound like they're reciting passages from the Necronomicon. The sounds the skeletons make though I feel are just lazy. When they move, it's meant to sound like bones rattling, but it just sounds so cartoony and goofy. Coupled with their ridiculous attack methods and the way they move, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work for me. The absolute highlight of the sound design for me though is having Bruce Campbell doing the voice of Ash. Now, while the writing isn't fantastic, Bruce absolutely saves it as he delivers each line with the gusto, charm and attitude we've come to expect from our favourite seasoned Deadite hunter.
Groovy.
Even on the title screen, if you don't do anything, Ash antagonises you to press the start button.
Press the friggin' start button, would ya?
If you continue to do nothing, he'll continue to antagonise you till you do. It's fantastic.
You're here to play the game, right? Press the button. See that over there? That's the one. Press it. Hello? Paging player. Paging player. Presses the button.
During the game, pressing Y in the control pad makes Ash say a one-liner, which for me never gets boring.
You're going down. Let's go. Come to Papa.
He also comes out with one of the best insults I've heard in a while.
Listen, Spinach Chin, that damn book has been a pain in my ass for the last 8 years.
Now, Spinach Chin is a reference to the 1949 Three Stooges short called Malice in the Palace, in which Moe calls a man with a beard Spinach Chin, as calling someone Spinach Chin is accusing them of having a scruffy beard. Now, both director Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell are big Three Stooges fans, with numerous references to them in each Evil Dead film. Now, the Dreamcast version of Hail to the King is a noticeable graphical improvement over the PS1 version, but it's clear to see where corners have been cut in some aspects. Hail to the King would not have been the game you would have used to showcase the graphical horsepower of the Dreamcast to your mates back in the day. Overall, it's merely an upscale version of the PS1 version, and it shows it, which is really sad. Just to put things into perspective, 13 months earlier, Resident Evil Code Veronica was released on the Dreamcast, which really showcased what it could do graphically. Evil Dead Hail to the King is a typical early 2000s survival horror game lengthwise, in that you can complete it within 3 to 5 hours on your first attempt, and after that, once you know where things are, what to do, where to go, you'll be able to breeze through it in a few hours on future playthroughs. The game is very linear. There's no side missions to add any longevity or padding to the overall game. When you complete the game, there's no bonuses or unlockable content or additional game modes a la Resident Evil Mercenaries, you just start the game again. The game was advertised in magazines and even received a TV advert featuring none other than Bruce Campbell himself.
Well, are we ready to take a look?
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect! Oh god. Got anything smaller?
All you need is a chainsaw for an arm and a shotgun to be just like Bruce Campbell in Evil Dead. Hail to the King.
Hey, isn't that supposed to be a chainsaw?
You want a piece of this? Yeah, I didn't...
Rated M for mature.
Come on, you freak!
Help!
Come on, take it like a man!
Chasing me!
There was also an official walkthrough guide released by Prima, which gives a detailed guide on how to lead Ash through the game, as well as detailing all the weapons, items, enemies and bosses you'll encounter along the way. Back in 2000, when I first had my Dreamcast, my go-to gaming magazine had moved from Mean Machines and was now Official Dreamcast Magazine and DC UK. In their July 2001 issue, Official Dreamcast Magazine gave Hail to the King 5 out of 10, describing it as a Resident Evil rip-off, but quickly highlighted that survival horror games are basically a rip-off the Evil Dead in the first place, so it kind of balances out. They praise Bruce Campbell's voice work, particularly his one-liners, but blame awkward controls, repetitive sound, courtesy of
I'll swallow your soul!
And a generally slow and sluggish pace to the game. DC UK only got as far as a preview in their September 2000 issue, as the magazine sadly never lasted long enough to see Hail to the King get released. But at the time, they were looking forward to it, saying it was shaping up to be the best possible translation of the trilogy they could hope for. By this time, magazines were heading online, and it was sites like IGN and GameSpot that I was logging onto courtesy of my 56k dial-up modem. But after 6 o'clock when it was free, of course. Both IGN and GameSpot were not kind to Hail to the King. IGN scored it a low 3.6 out of 10, describing it as another victim of a horrible movie-to-game translation and should be laid in a nailed-shut coffin and shipped to the bargain bin cemetery. Ouch. GameSpot were equally as unimpressed and gave the game 4.5 out of 10, closing with, "It's hard to believe that the survival horror genre can only be done right by Capcom and perhaps Konami, but Hail to the King will do little to convince you otherwise." On the plus side, GameSpot did score the Dreamcast version of the game the highest out of the 3 releases, so I guess it's not a complete disaster. Currently, the game holds a Metacritic score of 49, with a user score of 7.5. I paid about £17 for Hail to the King on eBay, but even if I would have paid full price for it back in the day, I still would have been happy because despite all its flaws, both graphically and gameplay wise, despite the, at the time, infuriating controls, frustrating boss battles and frantic fighting mechanics in which your success depends less on skill and more on having enough health packs to outlast the enemy, I really enjoy this game. I enjoyed its old dated graphics and gameplay. It reminded me of how survival horror games used to be back in the day and how spoilt we are today in modern gaming, with drum-tight controls, fluid gameplay, eye-melting HD and 4K graphics, and enough post-completion additional content to keep you going back and replaying for hours. But the main reason I enjoyed Hail to the King was because it was an Evil Dead game, a game which continues the story of one of my all-time favourite film franchises. The last film, Army of Darkness, was released in 1992, so we had been waiting 9 years to see what would be next in store for Ash and his never-ending battle against the forces of evil. Also, the chances of us getting another actual film were slim to none back then, as Sam Raimi was preoccupied bringing Spider-Man to the big screen, and once that went on to be the huge success it was, he would then spend the next 5 years filming the 2 sequels, further reducing the chances of us ever getting another Evil Dead film. And even though it didn't capture aspects like the gore factor of the film, I would still say that it does a good job in capturing some aspects of spirits of the franchise, especially with its trademark Evil Dead not happy ending.
Yeah, we're home. Finally.
This town, I never thought I'd miss it, or see it again. Is it me, or does it seem a little empty? Where is everybody?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's Sunday or something.
Oh no. Ash!
What the? Oh no. No! No!
It can also be viewed that Hail to the King is very similar to the original Evil Dead film. Both were created by a new team, both of which were fairly inexperienced. Both teams' inexperience is evident on screen as the final product is far from polished, but both teams' passion for the end goal is clearly there to see. Both Sam Raimi's cast and crew were new and fairly inexperienced in filmmaking when they made the first Evil Dead film, apart from some early Super 8 short films that they made. Because of this, they adopted various guerrilla filmmaking methods in order to get the shots. Raimi himself was only 20 years old when he directed The Evil Dead. Heavy Iron Studios were a new studio, and this was their first game, so just as Raimi's inexperience is apparent in the first Evil Dead film, so too is Iron Studios' inexperience in Hail to the King, with its limited graphics, sluggish choppy controls and inconsistent hit detection. But both Raimi and Heavy Iron Studios' passion for their respective mediums was clearly there, and it shows in the final product. Evil Dead Hail to the King isn't for everyone. If you don't like survival horror games, then this is definitely not for you. If you like survival horror games but have no knowledge of the Evil Dead franchise, then there's enough been there, done that, seen it all before in Resident Evil and other survival horror games that you can pick this up, play away, know what to do, and have a fun time. If you're an Evil Dead fan, then this is a no-brainer. This is definitely one to play. I can definitely see how Hail to the King may have got lost and forgotten about on release, as the world was still being wowed by the likes of Code Veronica and its 3D polygonal backgrounds, moving camera and finely detailed characters whose mouths move when they speak, and this was a game that was released over 12 months prior. Even horror films and horror games in 2001 were evolving, and the genre was moving into a more cerebral rather than visceral experience.
See? I'm real.
So in comparison, Hail to the King came across as rather outdated. But today, in 2021, when The Evil Dead is making a bit of a comeback with a fantastic remake, amazing TV series, a new documentary, new film on the way, and even a new game due out soon, there's no better time to be an Evil Dead fan. I really can't recommend Hail to the King enough. Unlike my other games that I reviewed, I don't have the rose-tinted spectacles of nostalgia possibly clouding my view of this game, as I only played it for the first time very recently. Look past all its shortcomings, see it for the love letter to Evil Dead that it is and its continuation of Ash's story, and I really do think you'll enjoy it. Okay, that just about brings us to the end of my review of Evil Dead Hail to the King on the Dreamcast. I hope you've enjoyed it, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.